Hello, my name is Dr. Ian St. John, and it is my privilege to welcome you to the latest in our series of StJohnsPipeCasts. Our topic today is the interpretation of economic development provided by W. Rostow in his book The Stages of Economic Growth, a Non-Communist Manifesto. Published in 1960, it has been, I think, the most influential and certainly most controversial book on economic history ever published, and generated a vast number of reviews and studies, attempting either to vindicate his propositions or more frequently qualify or refute them. Rostow, who was born in New York in 1916, studied at the universities of Yale and Oxford before joining the staff at Columbia University of New York, and then in 1950 moving to MIT. But Rostow was also active in public affairs. After the war, he helped to formulate the Marshall Plan and later served in the National Security Office under Presidents Johnson and Kennedy, where he was a supporter of the Vietnam War. But it is the author of The Stage of Economic Growth that he's now best remembered. Now, Rostow had a twin motive in writing his book, which he did not disguise. First, he wanted to provide a long-term interpretation of the economic development of nations, an interpretation that integrated both economic and non-economic factors. But second, he wanted to present students with an all-embracing account of historical change that would rival Karl Marx's Communist Manifesto. Because Marx's sweeping historical generalizations have proven very persuasive to generations of students and encourage the idea that socialism was somehow the key to future economic progress, particularly in less developed countries. Rostow wanted to challenge this appeal of Marxism, arguing not only that history could be interpreted along lines very differently than those suggested by Marx, but also that a capitalist mixed economy provided the best model for economic progress, as it had been the mechanism for previous economic development. Rostow's essential positions were these. First, that economic development proceeds by stages, that these stages follow a regular pattern, and that the ability of a society to pass from one stage to another depend on the capacity of that society to develop and make use of the best available technology. The ability to make use of technology was determined, Rostow argued, by economic factors, but also by cultural, political and religious factors. In other words, economic development must be understood as reflecting the interaction between technology, the economy, and wider political and cultural influences. In this way, again, Rostow thought he was contesting simplistic Marxist models, which he regarded as technologically determinist, with technological change leading to economic change, to social change, to political and cultural change. Rostow sought to argue that all these various elements, culture, society, economics, technology, interacted simultaneously to shape the development process. So in this way, again, Rostow's book was an anti-communist manifesto. So let's look then at his model. Well, according to Rostow, 4 key variables interact to shape the growth process. First, there is the growth of science, which in turn creates new technological potential in regard to systems of production and communication. But these technological potentialities are not always deployed. And the second factor is the degree to which the social system is ready and able to deploy new methods of production. In situations where it is, these new methods won't be applied at first across the economy as a whole. Rather, they will be introduced in certain parts of that economy that Rostow calls leading sectors. And these leading sectors like cotton and iron and steel in the British Industrial Revolution, then pull the economy forwards. And the new technology is gradually diffused through the economy. Lastly, rising output and incomes cause the structure of demand to shift, say, to consumer durables and services. And this leads to the emergence of new leading sectors, like the automobile industry, to cater for this shifting structure of demand. The following diagram summarises, I think, the rough chain of causality in Rostow's model. As you can see, it is the interaction of science and technology and the receptivity of society to change that creates the potential for growth, which is then exploited by innovating entrepreneurs who develop leading sectors, which then pull the economy as a whole forwards. Using this scheme, Rostow identified 5 main stages in the growth of societies. Stage 1 is traditional society. Such a society is in the grip of custom. Science hardly exists, and the natural world is viewed fatalistically as beyond the control of man. Hence, productive methods change slowly, productivity is low, people are generally poor, and the economy is dominated by agriculture, the basic business of producing enough food to sustain life. All societies start like this. Next comes stage 2, which Rostow called the preconditions for takeoff. This stage sees 2 key developments. First, modern science begins to emerge, with the belief that the laws of nature can be understood, and once understood, can be used to manipulate the natural world in man's interest. Second, society itself becomes more open to new ways of doing things. There's a rise of the nation state, and national governments begin to seek for ways to develop their resources, if only for war, a policy we generally call mercantilism. Governments began to build infrastructure like harbours and roads. Commerce expands, generating a new merchant class who begin to save and invest through the banking system. And new ways of thinking emerge, such as the Protestant Reformation, challenging the hold of traditional Catholic theology. Basically, the grip of custom weakens, but still productive potential is limited, and the economy is still pre-modern. Growth remains slow. And so we arrive at stage 3, the takeoff into sustained growth. For Rostow, this is the key discontinuity in modern world history, and his model really turns on this point. For the first time, the economy begins to grow continuously. And it is now that entrepreneurs begin to apply new technologies informed by scientific ideas to production in certain leading sectors like the cotton industry, iron and steel and engineering. Savings are invested in capital equipment, and the share of GDP that is invested rises rapidly. Rostow says it approximately doubles in 20 years. With greater capital investment in new technologies and infrastructure, the economy grows and living standards start to rise. Population grows, cities expand, banking develops, and agriculture becomes more productive as it seeks to feed the rising urban population. Governments play an important role here, perhaps in creating a secure legal system, upholding patents, investing in infrastructure like ports and railways. It is this takeoff that carries the pre-modern economy into the modern age. To quote Rostow, the takeoff is defined as an industrial revolution tied directly to radical changes in methods of production, having their decisive consequence over a relatively short period of time. It is the great watershed in the life of modern societies. The forces making for economic progress expand, and come to dominate the society. Growth becomes its normal condition. In terms of dating, Rostow locates the first takeoff to Britain in the Industrial Revolution of the late 1700s. Then followed France, America, Germany, Japan, and then Russia. Most countries have now gone through the takeoff into modern economic growth. The takeoff is succeeded in Rostow's model by stage 4, the drive to maturity, which Rostow defines as the period when a society has effectively applied the range of the then modern technology to the bulk of its resources. Now the economy is characterised by growing industry and population, expanding cities, and rising productivity and incomes. The growth process remains similar to that of the takeoff, namely a diffusion of new technologies through the economy by means of a series of new leading sectors. So, for example, in the case of Britain, where the initial takeoff of the Industrial Revolution was associated with the cotton, iron, steel and coal industries, during the drive to maturity, the leading sectors were the expansion of the railway system and the development of engineering. In this way, the profile of the mature capitalist economy emerges, and governments, partly under pressure from the expanding urban working class, take a more active role in tackling the social consequences of development, providing education, sanitation and some health care. In terms of dating, Rostow suggests that this stage was reached about 60 years after the initial takeoff. So about 1850 in Britain, 1900 in America, 1910 in France and Germany, and 1950 in Russia. The final stage, stage 5, Rostow called the age of mass consumption. What distinguishes this stage is that the development of the economy is now driven by the consumption spending of households. Rising real incomes lead to a strong growth in demand for products with what we call a high income elasticity of demand. Rostow was thinking here of demand for consumer goods like washing machines, televisions, radios and motor cars, to which we would now add probably computers, mobile phones and digital services. However, the fact of mass consumption is not itself automatic. Once an economy has attained to a large GDP per capita, it can indeed use these resources to make abundant consumer goods. But it can also choose to use the resources for other priorities. In Britain, for example, a lot of resources were devoted from the 1940s onwards into expanding the welfare state and the health service, requiring therefore a higher level of taxation and a lower level of private consumption than in, for example, the United States. In 1930s Germany, the economy was operating at full employment, output was high, but the products of that industry were devoted to making ammunition and armaments for war, and private consumption spending was thereby squeezed in Germany in the 1930s. So again, you can see in Rostow's model how political and social attitudes can shape actual economic development. America entered the age of mass consumption from the 1920s, and most of Western Europe and Japan from the 1950s. Put simply, it can be defined as the age of the motor car. What will come after the age of mass consumption, Rostow was not willing to speculate. The issue for him is, what would mankind do once its basic economic problems had been solved, when all humans were clothed, fed and housed? Would then humans invent new productive challenges, like colonising space? Or would they prefer to use their enhanced productivity to cultivate their leisure time, writing poetry in the morning and playing the violin in the afternoon? Or would they perhaps simply lapse into boredom and get up to mischief? This we cannot know. But, Rostow concluded, there's enough to be getting on with, spreading development through the globe and avoiding the peril of nuclear destruction. So let us conclude. Rostow summed up his message as follows. The argument of this book has been that, once man conceived of his physical environment as subject to knowable, consistent laws, he began to manipulate it to his economic advantage. And once it was demonstrated that growth was possible, the consequences of growth and modernisation, notably its military consequences, unhinged one traditional society after another, pushed it into the treacherous path of the preconditions, from which many, but not all of the world's societies, have now emerged into self-sustained growth through the take-off mechanism. Now we need to be clear here that Rostow did not provide a theory of economic growth. He did not construct a model of the growth process with a set of assumptions and functional relationships, and then derive some deductions concerning the development process. What he in fact provided was a schematic generalization of the historical growth experience of the world's leading developed nations, especially the United Kingdom and the United States. Rostow's book is an inductive work of history rather than a deductive one of economic reasoning. Of course, as a work of history, it is greatly simplified. But this has not stopped historians pointing out that many of its propositions do not fit the facts of historical detail. For example, historians have questioned whether investments, a share of GDP, really did double during the British takeoff, or whether railways really were the crucial factor in America's takeoff. But the more serious objection, I think, to Rostow's book is that it is indeed just a simplified description of what actually happened in a series of leading economies. So it's nothing to say why things happened as they did, or why then and not at some other time, or if they had to happen like this. To put it bluntly, the key factor unlocking the path of modern economic growth in Rostow's model is the development of modern science. But Rostow doesn't seek to explain the emergence of modern science. It just happens. And if the emergence of modern science just happens, then so similarly does the takeoff as a whole. It just happens. And it's for this reason, of course, that Rostow cannot predict what will happen next. He can only describe what has happened. But given that none of us can predict what will happen tomorrow, let alone in 50 years' time, then it's not perhaps such a damaging objection. And Rostow did at least provide a useful way of organising our understanding of the economic history of the last 300 years. And this in itself, I think, is no mean achievement.